insights from both successful and from promising programs and showcase some of their more successful interventions. And we also wanted to make sure we were holding space to discuss some of the practical considerations that practitioners and activists face as they undertake this work. So we heard from practitioners leading the Empower program in Kenya, Malawi, and Uganda, those leading the Asking and Telling intervention in Kenya, Zero Tolerance model in South Africa, as well as those leading the Good School Toolkit here at Raising Voices in Uganda. And the third and the final seminar sort of opened up to the global stage and bringing together thought leaders from the African Child Policy Forum, from Safe to Learn, Haki Elimu, the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, and many others to really talk about how this Sub-Saharan Africa regional hub within the Coalition for Good Schools can move forward with this work, can continue to convene practitioners and what's most needed to build this movement out, as well as how to leverage on the existing momentum that we had built at that time and practical steps needed to amplify voices of the Global South practitioners on the global stage. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Stella. Thank you, Stella.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that this has given you a sneak peek of what happened in 2021. And this convening is building onto the 3 convenings that we had, but specifically it offers us as practitioners a platform again to learn and share experiences on preventing violence against children in schools in Sub-Saharan Africa. We are privileged to have practitioners that are leading and researching in this area of work on the panel, and they will share with us the experiences drawn from across the continent. Just to give you an idea of the coverage, we're going to have representation from Eastern Africa, we're going to have representation from Southern Africa, and then we'll jump to West Africa. All these will be blended with rich experiences of practitioners that are working and researching in this area. And through their exposition, they'll be able to elaborate on the concept of the whole school approach and examples of how these approaches have been utilized in the region and its benefits for this work. I know definitely that on the call we have experts. We can't take it for granted. We appreciate you for taking time and interest, and you have the knowledge and experience. I implore you all to feel freely engaged, share, use the chat, and it's my sincere hope that we will use this platform to learn. But above all, that we'll continue to create this mutual conversation within the country, across the region, but also learning. Because as the Coalition for Good School, our aim is to create a community of practice comprising of practitioners that we already have in the room in Africa, and also ensure that we succeed. And to succeed, we need to work collectively and work together. I implore you all to be connected, stay connected, and be part of creating this movement to prevent violence against children in and around schools. And now I'll hand over to Samalie, who will be leading us through. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stella. Thank you very much, Devin, for giving us history and background about the Coalition for Good School, the global webinars that have been taking place, setting us up well for this Pan-African webinar. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Samalie Lutaaya, and I am the Learning and Partnership Technical Advisor working at Impact and Innovations Development Center. At IIDC, we are taking for assistance organization and we promote evidence-based social development innovations that improve the well-being of vulnerable groups in Africa. Ideally, we are a learning partner, and on this webinar, I'm so delighted and privileged to be the moderator, a task that I'm doing with a lot of excitement and clear purpose as to why I have to do it. You know, we are a learning partner. So Stella has elaborated the reasons why we are here and the objectives. So I don't have to repeat that. I just want to let you know that on this webinar, we are going to largely use English, but we are very keen on holding future webinars in more languages. So please, our colleagues that are coming from West Africa or other regions that speak French or Portuguese or any other languages, please excuse us for today, but we really plan to make this much better. We hope that we'll spend up to 75 minutes on this webinar, and we'll have 4 speakers who will be giving us inspiring presentations of about 8 minutes each, And thereafter, we will have 20 minutes of discussion. So please, participants, as you're listening to the presenters, please make sure that you take down your notes and also use the chat or question and answer box to share with us your comments or to ask your questions, so that during the plenary, we are able to address your questions and also be able to speak to your mind about the different topics that are going to be presented. So at this point, without wasting a lot of time, allow me to present the speakers in their order of how they're going to be presenting. Incidentally, they are all ladies. Thank you very much, ladies, for your passion about child protection. I will start with the first speaker, who will be Mrs. Stella Ayo-Odongo, who has just been speaking to us, but just for you to know a bit about who she is. Stella is a child rights and child protection social policy expert and an advocate for social justice with over 25 years of progressive experience in strategic leadership, development management, and program operations. Stella served as the director of pathfinding countries under the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children that was hosted by UNICEF. She has extensive knowledge and experience advocating for vulnerable groups such as children. And on this webinar, Stella will set the pace by highlighting the opportunities that schools offer in preventing violence against children. And she'll be looking at the findings from the study that the coalition did, the evidence review that she was just talking about earlier. And then our second speaker will be Dr. Manuela Ahogo, a regional research and policy advisor for Sub-Saharan Africa at Together for Girls. She's based in Cote d'Ivoire. And for our colleagues in Cote d'Ivoire, we're really sorry that we are using English, but next time, promise. Yeah, Manuela provides violence against children in schools, country support, research, project management, and technical support to research partners in Sub-Saharan Africa, you know, in her work at Together for Girls. And Manuela is a public health researcher in the field of violence against children, and she's received a doctorate from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where she's also a member of a child protection research group. So on this webinar, Dr. Manuela will share information on what data tells us about violence in schools in Sub-Saharan Africa, and why a whole school approach is a compelling way to address violence against children. Our third speaker of the day will be Mrs. Nkiwane Ngobile, who is working for Forum for African Women Educationists, FAWE, Zimbabwe. She will present about the minimum standards of the whole school approach and also share experience of how the standards have been tested and operationalized in Zimbabwe. And then the last and fourth speaker of the day will be Mrs. Yvonne, Laruni, a staff at Raising Voices with over 12 years experience of working with schools to prevent violence against children. She's currently with Raising Voices as a program manager for the Board Schools team. And you can imagine Yvonne, on a daily basis, she works and supports schools, and in Uganda, giving oversight to over 1,400 schools. So she has practical experience, and she will come and talk to us about the Good Schools Toolkit as a schools approach, and also to present to us the considerations that Raising Voices made and informed their design of a lighter version of the Good Schools and the transition to go and work into the secondary schools. So that said, and with that agenda and overview of who is going to speak to us, I will now invite our first speaker, Mrs. Stella Ayo-Odongo, to share with us the opportunities of working in schools. Dear Stella, please take up that space and talk to us more about that.
Thank you very much, Samalie, and thank you once again to the participants for joining in. Just to give a bit of a context, Samalie already mentioned that I've been working in this field for more than 2 decades. And in the 2 decades that I've been working in this field, the only time that there was a spotlight that came close to focusing on violence against children was when the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals was released by and launched by the UN Secretary General on Violence Against Children. key to the launch of the Sustainable Development Goals was a specific focus on preventing violence against children, which was contained in target 16.2. And as a result of that, there was a momentum. There was a swell, like everybody now started speaking violence. But while the conversation on violence in all these spaces was going on, there was a section of it that was there but not spoken about. And so when the coalition then carried out the evidence review, it clearly showed that prevention of violence against children will take a big leap if we invest in preventing violence against children in and around schools. And this is why, I'll just give a quick overview. Every year, 246 billion children and young people experience violence against children in and around schools. This alone shows that violence against children in and around school is a global phenomenon, and preventing it, therefore, is crucial. The obvious, which we all know, is that school presents a unique opportunity to reach large numbers of children. That one is a given. According to UNESCO, UNESCO statistics show us that 1 billion children go to school every day, and they spend a significant proportion of their time in school. And therefore, what more do we need than a structured area where we can easily reach children? And therefore, school presents itself as an opportunity where interventions in schools will benefit more children, will reach a larger crowd, and will be able to prevent violence against children. The second one is about the school having a mandate to prevent violence against children. The opportunities that schools have a mandate to minimize exposure to violence against children, as well as identify and mitigate it. Again, because children are brought into this space and they're in a collection they're in one space. Teachers, administrators who then have the duty to oversee, who are accountable to oversee and manage these children, have the duty to prevent and minimize violence. They are able to identify when they see things going wrong, and they're able to deal with it before it goes out of hand. The third one is that schools operate as a system in service of the community. Many a time, when the community entrusts children, when we as parents, let me speak to myself as a parent, if I send my child to school, I have handed over the responsibility and the social obligation to the school to create a conducive environment that guarantees the protection of the child, and to ensure that from time to time, the child is free and protected from violence. And the school, therefore, now is duty-bound to ensure that the systems and the policies guarantee the protection of the child. And this, because many schools are public funded, even the private schools, their vested interest by the stakeholders. And because of that, it creates, the school is an environment that enables us to look at violence, to undertake violence intervention programs using the school as a system. And then my final one. Everyone desires to create a better school. Each time, and I'll just take a quick example. Each time we have children that become of age and desire to take them to school, the first thing that we go is to look out what are the features of the school. Do they have toilets? And that is for you and me. Do they have toilets? Are there facilities? Are the teachers friendly? And especially when we're looking at toddlers. So we all desire to create this environment where the school is a better place for children. So every government has the mandate to influence what happens in school. And so because the government has the mandate to influence, they have an eye, kind of like eyes on, eyes in, and ears onto the school to ensure that everything that happens is beneficial to the child. The second stakeholder that has their eyes on is the parent. So everybody as a parent has an interest, has a stake in what happens in the school. So those are some of the 4 areas that I would like to quickly highlight. I know that the colleagues that are on the call will delve deep into why it is important, but I just thought I would just pick up these 4 just to give us an insight on why the opportunities that school present for us to end violence or prevent violence against children. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stella. It's always very clear and well articulated. And it's, you know, exciting when you give the practical examples of how everyone is interested in the school and they want to take their children to a good school, you know, where the environment is okay, toilets are okay, the services are okay. But now, as we are excited to learn that schools provide a very good opportunity, let's see what data is telling us about violence in the schools. And at this moment, I would like to invite Dr. Manuela to tell us about their findings regarding violence against children in the schools. Dr. Manuela, over to you.
Thank you so much, Samalie. So in this presentation, I would like to talk about the use of data and evidence to understand school-related violence, especially the gender dimension of school violence. And this through the secondary analysis and application of the violence against children and youth surveys for the education sector that we conducted. We believe that data should guide the way, should guide action and advocacy. And at Together for Girls, we do this through the national surveys on violence against children, the VACs, but also other quality data that allow us to understand the dimension of school-related violence. And in this presentation, I will focus on the VACs. To date, the VACs are the largest source of data on violence against children in the world. We work in 25 countries, and the VACs are national household surveys led by national governments with the technical assistance from the CDC, implemented in most cases by local Institute of Statistics as part of the Together for Girls partnerships. Most VAC surveys receive funding from PEPFAR, and they are retrospective, a 3-stage cluster sample design survey, and ask questions to children and youth aged 13 to 24 years old, males and females. In school, VACs allow us to ask questions on or provide information on school attendance. We can disaggregate this by male and female by gender, and we can ask questions on or find information on experiences of physical, emotional, and sexual violence by teachers and peers, whether classmates or other peers in the community. VACs also ask questions about the acceptability of corporal punishment in school or GBV or endorsement of gender roles, and also provide information on risk factors such as socioeconomic status, bonding with families, links to families, etc. For this analysis, the secondary analysis was conducted in 11 VACs countries, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. And we utilized cross-sectional regression analysis techniques for survey data to fully understand school-related gender-based violence in each of the selected country. And this first set of analysis was funded through USAID, and the analysis was conducted by AData. We tried to answer the following questions. What is the national prevalence of SRGBV? Do boys and girls experience similar rates of SRGBV? Whether boys and girls are more likely to experience one form of SRGBV? How does SRGBV affect rates of school absenteeism for boys and girls, and the patterns as well of disclosing incidents of SRGBV and service taking among boys and girls? In the interest of time, I won't be presenting all the findings, but really to point to the power of the data, how the data, the VACs data, allow us to capture all this specific information that is so key to achieve a whole school approach, that a school that is safe for children in school and beyond school as well. In terms of the prevalence here, we see the percentages of students who experience one or more forms of physical and sexual violence perpetrated by teachers and classmates. Looking at, Malawi, for instance, we have, males experiencing more violence compared to female, whereas in the case of Nigeria, we have more female experiences, more of this school-related sexual and or physical violence compared to males. In any case, all these prevalences are really high and really call our attention to end school-related violence. Putting this data as well of the context of sub-Saharan Africa in context to other countries such as Honduras or Colombia, where we have data as well, allow us as well to contextualize the global prevalence of violence and how important it is as well to address this issue at the sub-Saharan African level to reduce the scale of violence globally. Violence is also perpetrated by classmates, and we see that male students are common perpetrators of violence in school. We see this in the case of Zambia, Uganda, Nigeria, and Malawi. In the cases of Uganda, for instance, male students have, the percentages are sometimes twice higher compared to a female student who experience violence by the female classmate. But for the female, we see that, female students as well perpetrate more violence towards a female counterpart, although this prevalence is lower when it comes to physical violence. The prevalence of sexual violence is really high, perpetrated by classmates, as we can see in Malawi, Nigeria, Uganda, and Zambia, with similar rates as well for female in the same countries when it comes to sexual violence by classmates. Teachers are also perpetrators of sexual violence, and we see that these are particularly high in the countries that have presented, especially among female students, really highlighting the gender dimension and the vulnerability of female students in sub-Saharan African schools. Corporal punishment as well, very high by teachers. I want to point to the highest prevalence showed here on the left-hand side of percentages of students who experience physical violence perpetrated by male teachers, being particularly high in these 4 countries, and also in other countries, sub-Saharan countries, where we did the analysis. Students who experience physical violence by classmates sometimes miss school. So this is showing the percentages of females and males who miss school as a result of physical violence experienced during childhood by a classmates. And the rates are also high per country among boys and girls alike. And students who experience school violence do not always receive the service that they need. The accompaniment showing here the example of Nigeria, where 21% of females told someone about physical violence, and male disclosed even less violence. And of those, only 2% sought services and only 1% received services, really calling to the support that these students need. We conducted further analysis as well as part of the Canada Data for Change 1 project to really go deeper and understand the relationship between violence and education, and explore potential modifiable risk and protective factors and barriers to educational outcomes in 12 countries. And these are the characteristics that we look: violence, victimization, social demographic factors such as socioeconomic status, social and structural support in the communities, in the family, attitude and norms, risk behaviors. And for outcome, we looked at those students who achieved primary school or less, or those who went further into secondary school or more. And the results of the surveys really provide us with an understanding of some risks and protective factors as to how school can protect children, but also where within school we can provide more support to students. Really want to call your attention on, those orphan students as well that do not go far in school. We see that, these factors were higher on the left-hand side among youth with primary school or less. So physical violence by an intimate partner, orphanhood before age 18, child marriage in 11 countries, pregnancy, that's early pregnancies as well, food insecurity, that is a proxy as well of socioeconomic status, of poverty, those children who've worked in the past 4 months, endorsing traditional gender norms, that harmful norms, domestic violence as well in 10 countries, agreeing with corporal punishment and early sexual debut. So these really provide us with an understanding that to address the issue of violence against children, among those children who work in school, there are specific risk factors that allow us to design interventions that can really reach out to communities and families as well. I wanted to show this particular graph on endorsement of wife beating that was less common among male students attending or completing secondary school. The further the education, the less endorsement there was to these harmful practices. We see this across all these countries presented here, from Cote d'Ivoire to Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda as well, which really calls us onto the program, the content of the curriculum that we provide as well to our students. Similar to those risk factors showing that child marriage as well among males, food insecurity, working in the past 12 months, and endorsing harmful practices and smoking as well can prevent risk factors and can direct our implications for policies, our rethinking and reinventing, interventions to end school. We see through this data that experiences and perpetration of violence vary widely based on gender, and that a whole school approach is needed to end VAC in and beyond school. And this effective intervention requires an understanding of the unique and varied ways that gender roles, attitude, norms, and context, including family support, community, friendships, violent prevention, education in school, can impact the prevalence and nature of violence in school. So you can find further information on our SRGBV resources on the Together for Girls website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manuela. That was well said, of course, a bit uncomfortable sitting in Kampala, Uganda, and seeing how data is showing that there's a number of students who are experiencing violence in schools in Uganda, both boys and girls. It's quite painful. And of course, how it is causing absenteeism and how it is, perpetrated by teachers. It's all very painful. And more painful at that, low rates of receiving services. That is really painful because it goes beyond those who report, but also those who have to respond to the violence. And, it's also very sad that, big number of people are endorsing wife beating. It's really terrible, but thank you very much for giving us this data. Now we have a reason to deal with the whole school approach. And of course, you well said it, that it's important to design interventions that reach out to the communities and families, because maybe we came to this webinar with the perception that a whole school approach should only look within the school. So it's really well said and clear why we have to go beyond, because a person who is not educated, according to your statistics, is very much likely to also cause violence, according to what you are showing us. So you've set the context very well. Data is annoying. And now we are going to hear from the next two presenters who will sort of give us, the standards, but also the case study of how they use the whole school approach to address violence against children. Our next speaker is going to come from FAWE, Zimbabwe, and that is Mrs. Ngobile, Nkiwane, who is going to share with us about the standards for a whole school approach and how this has been used by FAWE, Zimbabwe. Mrs. Ngobile, please talk to us more about your work.
Thank you, Samalie, and good day, everyone. So I am going to take you through a presentation where I'll be unpacking a whole school approach to addressing school-related gender-based violence. And I'm also going to make reference to the 8 minimum standards, and then also explain how we followed in Zimbabwe, and also the many stakeholders that we worked with, so that we show the importance of each and every stakeholder in the fight against school-related gender-based violence. So, like Samalie has said, I am from FAWE, Zimbabwe. We implemented the whole school approach in 2018 up to 2020, and we implemented it in partnership with UNGEI, UNICEF, FAWE, and also our Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. So we had to work closely with our Ministry of Education, because the project also included issues of having schools to come up with code of conduct that they were then going to use. And also it included teacher trainings. So we really had to work closely with the ministry so that we could have buy-in and sustainability for our project. Could you move the slide, please? Okay, so in terms of the whole school approach, it was aimed at strengthening the capacity of school leadership, parents, teachers, and students in establishing a safe and inclusive learning environment. So from the beginning, by it being a whole school approach, we had to include the learners, the parents, the teachers, and even the stakeholders who are not physically present close to the school, so that we could attain that what we were calling a whole school approach. And we implemented this as a pilot, so we were really wanting to see how much impact we were going to achieve by following through the 8 standards. So it also includes developing and strengthening in-school policies and procedures, training and capacity building, as well as building school, family, community partnerships. So this was informed by the fact that a school is not independent from its community. So there is a need to include the community members, the families, the school leadership in and outside of school, so that whatever changes were happening in the school could also match what was happening in the community. Next one, please. So this image shows the 8 minimum standards of the whole school approach. So you'd realize that there is codes of conduct, which I'm going to speak to. There is teachers and educational support. There's issues of child rights and their participation. There are issues of reporting, monitoring and accountability, issues of incident response. There is safe and secure physical environments, parent engagement, and also school leadership. So these are the minimum standards that make up the whole school approach. And these standards speak to what is happening in the school, on the way to school, and also in the communities. So in terms of the first minimum standards, I have the effective school leadership and community engagement to create safe, gender-sensitive learning environments. So here it was critical for us, for the school governance body and the community to lead efforts to prevent SRGBV. So it was a deliberate initiative to have the school leadership leading such effort, so that the project already is a buy-in, and also the teachers, the school learners also know that this is coming from a leadership position. So as FAWE, what we then did, we trained school heads, both males and females, and we also trained representatives from the Ministry of Education, so that they could then, first of all, understand SRGBV in all its forms, because we realized that also there are some subtle forms of violence, or some violence that could have been accepted in the schools over time. So it was critical to start with the school leadership for them to appreciate what we meant by SRGBV. So this was done in 10 schools. We're implementing in 10 schools, 10 that were in a rural setup and 10 in an urban setup. So when we were doing these trainings, we would also notice the differences in acknowledgement or knowledge levels, or even the action towards SRGBV when it came to comparing the rural and also the urban. This is an image from one of our trainings with school heads and Ministry of Education officials. We can move on. And then our other standard is the code of conduct. So the foundation of a whole school approach is the development and implementation of a comprehensive code of conduct that clearly outlines ethical norms, standards of acceptable behavior for education staff, students, and parents. So the code of conduct was meant to speak to everybody at the school, not only the learner, but the teachers, the administration, and even the non-teaching staff, so as to then create a SRGBV-free environment. So when we first got into the schools, we saw that they did have a code of conduct which they were using previously, but most of them were written in that language, which is not very positive, like they were just stating rules, which the project was then saying there is a better way of crafting a code of conduct which is positive, which also enforces positive disciplining amongst the learners. So an example could be in terms of a code that just says, do not come to school late or do not make noise. We took the teachers and the school heads through a process of crafting better coined codes of conduct for everybody at the school. So we engaged the teacher unions that are registered in Zimbabwe and the legal experts in issues of child rights and child protection to help us craft code of conduct, which also showed maybe the penalties for a breach of the codes, and also putting in mind the elimination of corporal punishment in the schools. So this was an interesting process as the teachers also took part in rewriting the school rules that they had. And then we also encouraged them to then have sessions in the schools where they regularly unpack the code of conduct and share it with even the school development committees, which are made up of parents and the children leadership, the prefects bodies, and also every other learner at school, so that everybody would be on the same page in terms of what is acceptable in terms of behavior. The code of conduct was helpful in addressing even issues of bullying, issues of stealing, and even conduct for the teachers when it comes to their relationship with the children. You can move on. Okay. And then the other standard speaks to teachers and educational support staff. Here again, we were working with the teachers, the educators, the administrative staff, including the school head and the deputy head, and all other non-teaching staff in the school, including our guards, our cooks, our matrons, our boarding masters, so that they could be in the front lines of the prevention of violence in the schools. The earlier speaker mentioned that teachers are also potential perpetrators of violence. So is the non-teaching staff, so are the girls and the boys. So we trained the educational support staff and the teachers so that they could be able to identify what we were saying was SRGBV, respond to it, and also report it. So we developed a training manual on the prevention of and response to SRGBV, which we used to train these teachers. We also shared copies with them for them to also further cascade the trainings with other teaching and non-teaching staff at their schools.
I'll kindly request you to move past a bit. Okay.
All right, thank you. Please move to the next slide. So we also had a minimum standard that spoke to children, their rights and their participation. Here as FAWE, we also engaged the learners themselves, primary and secondary education. These were girls and boys. So we trained them using a model that we adopted from FAWE, which is called to Seme or Let Us Speak Out. This model helps mainly the girls and the boys to speak up about problems that they are facing and come up with solutions. So we focused our problems in terms of SRGBV at the school. And it was amazing to see the learners pick forms of violence that teachers never thought were violence. And again, these forms were different in the urban setup and in the rural. And the learners, again, then managed to lead change. And by the time we wrapped up the project, they'd done massive changes in their schools. They'd labeled their schools with anti-SRGBV messages, and they were leading changes even between teacher and learner relations. We can move to the next one. Next one. Okay. So after empowering the learners, we also spoke about reporting, monitoring, and accountability. Here we trained school staff and teachers on reporting channels. Mainly, if we look at some of the rural schools in Zimbabwe, they are far from places like police stations. They are far from places like clinics where learners can get help, maybe medically, if one experiences, let's say, sexual abuse. So we managed to link these schools with local service providers who they could then report to in case of any SRGBV incidents at the school. We can move on. It's a picture of learners at one rural school with a suggestion box, which speaks to the incident response. So here we were saying all stakeholders need to feel confident that there are specific actions being uniformly put in place to address SRGBV. So here as an organization, we supported stakeholder engagements with the schools, where we brought in parents, business people around the school, church leaders, traditional leaders to come into the school and understand the status of SRGBV in the school. And we had these people who came in, make commitments to support issues of reporting, identifying and reporting violence. Some supported the school with resources to support in issues of reporting, to support even girls in terms of sanitary wear, because some of the violences which the girls were facing were also coming because of the issues of their sexual maturation, which the schools could not adequately cater for. We can move on. Then in terms of the strengthening of physical environments, we looked at issues like the school setup, where are the school grounds, where are the toilets, are they enough, how many are there for girls and boys. We spoke about issues of laboratories for science subjects. We spoke about issues of teachers' houses and their proximity to the classrooms. So we conscientize learners and teachers and parents in terms of how such places, physical environments in the school could be hotspots or places where SRGBV takes place. Suppose the school has some open pits, that environment would then no longer be safe for the children. Let's move on. So here's a signage of learners where they put at a water place where they drink water. They just shared that learners first, adults second, because there was a challenge at the school in terms of water. But when they finally got a water source, it became a source of violence because learners were queuing and ending up fighting. So this feeds again into the physical safety of the school. We can move on. Then the last one is parental engagement. Here again, we had activities where we're involving the parents and even caregivers to be able to acknowledge SRGBV in the school, on the learner's way to school and even at home. So we engage the parents mainly through the school development committee, which is made up of parents. So by engaging parents, it then becomes a holistic approach in issues of addressing SRGBV. Okay, so I'm just going to run down activities that we did, and I will not explain much for the sake of time. But our first contact with the schools was a visioning workshop where we wanted to understand their levels of appreciation of SRGBV. So we managed to meet with the teachers, the school heads, the parents, the community leaders, and help them map out what they thought was SRGBV and how best we could then address it. So these were very helpful because it became our program together as we identified our issues and drew up a plan of action together. We then designed the workshop informed by the visioning workshops and then done the trainings like the teacher training using the gender responsive pedagogy, where we're also conscientizing teachers about their classroom language, about their classroom conduct, even their dressing. Because when we spoke about SRGBV, learners would then say, some teachers insult us, some give us nicknames, or some teachers dress in a way that disturbs us as boy learners or as girls learners. So we spoke about how best teachers can then accommodate a girl child and a boy child at the school. We also had a high-level launch of our project nationally, which was attended by our national level in the Ministry of Education, and our project got the necessary support that it needed. We can move on. So we then trained stakeholders. I've spoken about this. We trained stakeholders, we trained learners into SEME, and then the final step was engaging the schools, each school out of the 10, to come up with a code of conduct, which they are still using up to today. So by the end of all these listed trainings, our schools had managed to develop codes that are now guiding the conduct of the teacher, the non-teaching staff, the learners, even parents who visit. Some of these schools did not have secure fences and gates. Parents would walk in and out. Boys who are out of school would walk in and out of the school. So this conduct has been put in place, this code of conduct has been put in place to guard the conduct of everybody at the school. And then that is how they are now ensuring having a SRGBV school, and also through the links that we created with the local service providers, with the stakeholders, and empowering the children themselves to speak out against violence, to come up with solutions. I think we managed to create safer environments in the schools. Last one, please. These are images from one of our project schools. So learners then began to take initiatives labeling their school. The picture up there says that school commits to eradicating SRGBV. So this was now the learners' initiatives to say we are committing to joining hands to reduce SRGBV at the school. So that is the end of our presentation. That is what we conducted as FAWE Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ngobile. It's very exciting, and thank you very much for unpacking these standards and how FAWE Zimbabwe has applied themselves to the 8 minimum standards. There's great learning for all of us, and it was really exciting to see how it doesn't stop only at the school, but also around the school, where you are clear that the environment has to be conducive for children. And if they're pits that are a threat to children or risks to children, these have to be addressed, because this is normally the oversight that people focus so much inside without considering the environment outside the schools. I would like now to invite our last presenter to speak to us about the Good Schools Toolkit and the learnings that they use to develop an adapted version for the secondary schools, and that is none other than Yvonne from Raising Voices. Yes, Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Samalie. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining this call from. If you were in Uganda, I would have said good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Yvonne.
All right, so I'm briefly going to talk about our work using the Good School Toolkit. We have had a lot around the statistics on violence against children. And we've also seen how other colleagues in other countries are doing it. We also want to share how we are doing it, how we understand it, and some of the lessons we have learned along the way. So if you don't mind, I'd just like to share my screen.
Okay, can go ahead.
All right. Somebody, once you see the screen, please confirm.
Yeah, I saw it for a few and then it went off. Few seconds.
Okay, so I'll start by briefly talking about who we are. Raising Voices is a feminist organization that was founded in 1999, and we work to prevent violence against women and children. We strive to influence the power dynamics shaping relationships among males and females, but also relationships among the adults and the children. We have two evidence-based methodologies that have all been recommended under the INSPIRE strategies for really influencing social norms change. One of them is the Good School Toolkit that we are going to talk about. And we have done a lot of policy advocacy and a lot of engagement at national level around the Good School Toolkit, to the extent that we have been able to have it certified by the government of Uganda under the Ministry of Education, recommending it as a good practice for preventing violence against children in school. On the other hand, we also have SASA, that's a methodology that has been tested and proven to prevent violence against women in communities. That's briefly about Raising Voices. I'm not going to dwell much on this slide because Dr. Manuela really showed us how big the problem of violence is. These are just a few statistics, specifically from Uganda. As we can see, there's a lot of violence that is happening in schools. Children are experiencing violence, but also it's entrenched it's something deep-rooted, it's entrenched. There are laws by government to try and really ban it, but it continues to happen in our schools. And so this conversation is really timely because together we can come up with ideas of how we can continue to address this problem. And so when we look at the statistics that I've shared, but also those that Dr. Manuela shared, and also other statistics around, you can really see that there's a lot of violence happening against children in schools. And as Raising Voices, what is our approach? Our approach to preventing violence is what we call the Good School Toolkit. So it's a 6-step-wide intervention aimed to influence schools' operational culture and create opportunities for all to shape the learning environment at school. I'm going to talk about that in detail and specifically focusing on the operational culture and the things that we are doing. But briefly, that is what the toolkit is all about. And the toolkit, I just wanted to show you one of the things you'd find in the toolkit. It has a set of ideas, a set of materials, activities that have been recommended to schools. And we believe that if implemented over a period of time, it has the power to change children's experience of school and help them learn in a conducive learning environment. So at the core of this toolkit, there are 3 main ideas that we are really fronting. One of them is the teachers. We believe that when we have good and motivated teachers, then we'll have a good school. Then we also believe in a safe and conducive learning environment, one that is physical and psychologically conducive for learning. And I think FAWE hinted on that in their presentation. And we also believe that, to have a good school, we need a transparent and accountable administration. And so most of the ideas we really talk about aim for these three things. How do we understand a whole school approach at raising voices? The first thing is we recognize the multi-layers of influence flowing through the ecological framework surrounding the learner. We believe that there are so many other things that influence the learner's experience of school. This could be teachers, there could be peers, it could be the school administration, the parents, the community itself, the policymakers. And so if you want an intervention that is aiming at the safety of learners, you need something that is going to address the different layers that influence a child's experience of school. But then we also believe that for a whole school approach, we are aiming at addressing the norms, the beliefs, the practices that promote violence against children. That you don't only address one aspect of it, but if you're going to have a whole school approach, then you have to address all the different norms, the beliefs, and the practices to create a violence-free school environment. Then we also understand that violence is not an incident. It is not an event. Violence is a culture. And so if you're going to address, if you want to address it, then you also have to change the culture of the school. So for every approach that you're taking, you need to ensure that you're looking at changing the culture of the school, the way people do their things, the things they believe in, the systems they have put in place, the norms, their attitudes, all that needs to change for them to get to a place where they do not believe in the use of any form of violence against children. We also believe that for a whole school approach, you need to ensure that there are school-wide interventions or school-wide activities. And you don't only focus on a group of people, say only teachers or only learners or only the school administrators, but you ensure that everyone is participating in their different levels. Because when you do that, then you're able to change the culture of the school. Then we also believe that you need systems, you need structures, and you need policies, because then these are the ones that drive the transformation that we need. So these are some of the ideas that we front when we are talking about a whole school approach under the Good School Toolkit. So you could be wondering, how does this work? And the next two slides are really going to provide very practical ideas of how it works. But for the Good School Toolkit to thrive, there are 4 entry points. And these entry points are mainly the relationships that happen at school. One of them is the teacher-student relationship. If you're going to have to address violence, then you need to also address the teacher-student relationship. FAWE talked about the violence that happens among peers, but also Dr. Manuela also really showed. And I was sad to see that Uganda was holding the bar really high, which is really sad. And so the toolkit is here to address the peer-to-peer violence, but also the student and teacher relationship to the school. The students and teachers need to have a sense of belonging. They need to feel like the school belongs to them, and they also belong to the school. They need to have a stake. When we get our teachers and students to that level, then we are able to create the kind of schools that we desire. But also, most importantly, schools are not an island. They are part of a bigger community. And so for us to influence the change we want to see in our schools, we need the parents and the other community members on board, but we also need the governance structures, the district authorities, the local leaders at community level. They all need to be engaged in creating the kind of school that we desire. So in a more practical way, this is how the Good School Toolkit is doing some of those ideas I have talked about. One of them is that it is sequenced. There are 6 steps that are sequenced and complementary to each other, and these are implemented over a period of 18 months. So you have a step that is just bringing everyone together to think about the vision that they want to create for their school and how to make their school a better school. And then we are also looking at the whole school getting to understand what violence is and the impact it has on children and how it can be prevented. Then we have a step that is just looking at teachers, helping them understand that their role goes beyond teaching. to really nurturing and supporting and helping the learners. There's also a step that is looking at how do we discipline. In the earlier presentations, we really saw that corporal punishment was such a problem. And so there's a step that is looking at how do we discipline learners without inflicting any form of harm on them, but also how do we put them at the center of managing their discipline. And then there's a step that is looking at the learning environment, and it's equipping learners with skills that they are able to meaningfully contribute to creating the kind of environment they desire. And then finally, the administration comes in at step 6 on how to sustain and ensure that all the things that have been achieved over the period of the 18 months are not lost. So that is briefly, in a summary, what the toolkit is all about. And then the other thing also, in a very practical sense, is that the toolkit believes in the formation of school structures. It is school-led. It is owned by the schools. They implement the activities by themselves. All we do is provide the support and the resources. And so we have 2 teachers who are at the core of this implementation. We refer to them as teacher protagonists. Then these teacher protagonists work together with other 3 subcommittees. And so one subcommittee is for teachers, the other subcommittee is for learners, and the 3rd subcommittee is for parents. And these are probably what we could refer to as the steering wheel or the steering committees that work alongside the 2 teacher protagonists, and then they draw in the entire school community and also the surrounding community into the implementation of these ideas. The other thing also is that the toolkit is addressing the underlying causes of power and its gender dimension. That we are not looking at only, the underlying cause of VAC, which is power, the misuse of power. So we are not looking at only corporal punishment or sexual violence, but in the toolkit itself, the reflective sessions, the discussions, the activities, one of the things that they really want to bring out is for schools to understand that, if they are to prevent violence against children, then they need to be very intentional around how everyone is using and experiencing power. This could be the adults, the teachers and the learners, or it could just be the girls and the boys. It could be the parents and how they are getting involved. Then there are also reflective leadership workshops. So for us to change the social norms, the attitudes and the beliefs, there are a series of workshops. In every step that I mentioned above, you'll find at least 5 or more leadership workshops with looking at different topics. How do we think about our school? How do we make our school better? What kind of environment are we creating for our learners? How do I elevate my role from just teaching mathematics to understanding that I am a parent to these learners? How do we support students' mental health? How do we address the different forms of violence? There are questions for teachers around how they are using their power. And so all these are in form of leadership workshops. And all these are in the toolkit itself. Then we also work with schools to establish policies that they promote the safety of learners. And key among these policies are the policies around anti-bullying, because we recognize that peer violence can really be a problem. And then there's also the anti-sexual violence policy and the anti-corporal punishment policy, but there are also other policies. And just like FAWE said, also the other thing that we do in the toolkit as well is encouraging schools to really think about their own school rules and regulations and how those can either promote the safety of learners or put learners at a risk of experiencing violence. The other thing also within the toolkit that you will find is that schools work with the community and the district structures to address the different layers of children's experience of school. So we do not do this alone. We work with the district authorities, one, to endorse for their buy-in, but also we work with them to supervise whatever is happening in the schools. And then we also work with them to ensure sustainability. So for example, we have a cohort of schools that we last visited in March of March of last year. But the district authorities, while they are conducting their monitoring visits, they still go back. Even today, someone was telling me how they were visited and they were asking them questions around, are you still implementing the toolkit ideas? Do you use corporal punishment and things like that? So working with these structures is really important, but also working with the local structures within the community allows us access to the parents. What are some of the learnings? I know earlier Samalie said we'll talk briefly about our adaptation. So one of the learnings in this whole school approach was that we had done a lot of work with primary schools and the toolkit had been tested and indeed it works. The same ideas in the primary school toolkit can also work in the secondary school, but we realized that the secondary schools had very unique needs. And if we really wanted to meaningfully address those needs, we needed to develop a toolkit that is very specific to the unique context and the needs of secondary schools. So for example, we are dealing with adolescents. They want to exercise their power. You know, how do we support them exercise their power meaningfully? We are dealing with teachers who are in between school A, B, and C, you know, trying to make ends meet. How do we come up with a toolkit that supports those needs? We are dealing with violence that is manifesting slightly different from what we are seeing in primary school. So for example, in secondary school, the peer violence is very pronounced compared to primary school. So how do we come up with something that addresses that? We're also dealing with the gender disparities. They are quite pronounced. They are really huge in secondary school. And so all this brought us to a place where we then started to think of a toolkit that could help address these needs. And so that was one of the lessons that we've picked through implementing the whole school approach. That, you know, as you implement the whole school approach, you'll try to contextualize it to the needs of the different groups that you're working with. Then one of the lessons, I think this I've already mentioned, is that students at secondary school are demonstrating a lot of eagerness to run with these ideas. Sometimes when we go for the monitoring visits, when you open the students' files, they have the action plan, they have the minutes, they are documenting. And then when you open the teachers' committee's file, there's hardly anything, you know? The last thing you did with them is what you'll find. But that alone, the downside with it is that students alone cannot change the operational culture of the school. And so even as we find it exciting, we are always going an extra mile to ensure that we engage the rest of the teachers and the school administration and the parents to help them understand the importance in getting involved in transforming or creating the kind of school they desire. And then also the effects of the toolkit in schools is dose responsive. Like I said, there are 6 steps with activities and training workshops. If a school only did one step, they will benefit from only the one step. If they did only one activity from each step, that's what they will benefit. If a school is committed and does at least up to 70 or 60% of the activities and the training workshops, then we can really see the results. Then there are greater benefits from schools working with the surrounding infrastructure. I think I hinted on that already. Then also the collective leadership. If you're talking about the whole school approach, collective leadership is very important. Like I said earlier, we work mainly, the teacher protagonists lead the implementation. One of the things we found out at secondary schools was that the other teachers were a bit withdrawn from getting involved. For example, when they invited for a workshop or an activity. So what we have decided to do is ensure that every time there's somebody going to visit the school, they either hold activities during break time, lunch time, or after classes to make sure that all the teachers are brought on board, because we need everyone to be involved if we are going to have the change that we desire. Then I also talked earlier about the school administration, and so I'll not talk more about that. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for listening.
And thank you very much, Yvonne, for sharing your experience. Indeed, violence is not an incident, but rather a culture. You said it so well. I kept reflecting about that and how you underlined the major cause of violence, that being power. For sure, you made me reflect so much about all this and why we need system structures and policies in place and building relationships to control the power dynamics, and in a way we prevent violence against children. Dear participants, we really appreciate your keen interest in attending this webinar, and we respect your time so much that I kindly request that we initially planned to end this webinar at 4:15, but now we are 4 minutes before 4:15. If you could kindly allow us to finish at 4:30 sharp. Anyone is able to remain on this, we would love to take on the very many questions that have been put in the question and answer box, so that we can be able to speak to your desires and address your questions. So just for you to know, we'll go on up to 4:30, and now invite my dear presenters to address the questions. I think we've had several questions coming in for Dr. Manuela and questions for Ms. Ngobile. So I will kindly invite Dr. Manuela to take on the questions. I am really sure that you're able to read the questions in the question and answer box. So I will not waste time rereading the questions, but make sure that for those who are not able to read, you try to explain what you're addressing. And when you finish, I will take on Ngobile, and I think Yvonne, you have one or two to comment about. Thank you very much. Dr. Manuela, over to you, please.
Thank you, Samalie. So for the questions that was asked, the first one was on a definition of SRGBV, which definition we use in our analysis. So specifying that we define SRGBV as all physical and sexual violence experienced by students in and around school. That's what we call SRGBV, or what we've included in our analysis. And that corporal punishment was defined as physical violence perpetrated by teachers. I was also asked whether we could have our presentation. So our presentation is a fuller version of my presentation is on the Together for Girls website. So I've just shared the link as well. Yeah, the prevalence of violence presented was lower compared to other studies in Uganda. Any reason for this observation? So usually, VACs provide, a higher number, higher prevalence because of the depth and the breadth of questions on violence against children, especially when we compare to the mix and the DHS. So again, really, finding out more about, which other studies there were that showed lower prevalence higher prevalence of VACs. I'm just specifying that the VACs was implemented in 2015, and it's really important that to explain as well that Uganda has made tremendous effort to reduce violence, especially in school. So depending on the timeline, because VACs are cross-sectional, they are happening at a specific time point. I really want to acknowledge from 2015 that Uganda has done a lot, and that's something that I want to point to. And we did ask a specific question on school absenteeism. So have you missed school as a result of corporal punishment by a teacher, or violence by a classmate, or by violence in a community, riot, etc. And then I had a question by Katir as well on SV, that there was no SV among females with primary school or less, and why was that? So yes, I agree that sexual violence is high among girls who achieve primary school or less. This is, in the descriptive statistics, this is the case. And also because of our knowledge of the context, and you're right, girls disclosed less, although overall there was much less disclosure. But I pointed out that, we did first a chi-square test. So we did a bivariate analysis, a first level analysis, and then we went into a deep dive. At the first level of analysis, we didn't see any significance with sexual violence and educational outcome, but we went into a deeper dive analysis, and we are working on a publication, and I hope to share the results with you very soon. So stay tuned.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Manuela. And now I will kindly request Mrs. Ngobile to take on the next questions. Of course, you can start from where someone wants to know your experience of working with parents and gaining their meaningful participation without or with no or low costs. How is your experience about that? And then you'll take on other schools questions as well. And of course, someone from the Raising Voices team could prepare to talk about the difference between the whole school approach and the safe school approach, so that our friend from FAWE Zimbabwe just shares their experience and the questions that are being asked here.
All right, thank you very much, Salim, and thank you for the questions. So in terms of working with parents, actually, when we first introduced the project, there was a massive response in terms of parents, because usually some projects that are done at school do not involve the parents at all. Mainly it's the teachers and the children, and the parents are then forced to fit into what they hear. So our experience was a very good one. The parents, we went through the community through the school development committees. These committees are a parents' body that also sits in the decision-making agendas for the schools. So the experience was the parents were eager to cooperate, and some of them, they were not aware of even the policies, the laws that protect children in terms of corporal punishment or issues of child marriage. Some were aware, but they just accepted violence. So in terms of it being low cost, we would conduct our activities at the schools and ask parents from the closer communities to come to the school and just then provide a food for them. But otherwise, their participation was amazing. And you'd realize that most parents will not really be aware, or some it's about if they are in poverty or the effect of ignorance. But once you train them, if they come to one training, they are interested and they begin to change and leading the change with the others also. Then the other question here is on
what has been the parents' experience of having all teachers and parents involved in the intervention beyond the lead teachers or protagonists? I think that is going to raise some voices. And someone wanted to know whether there was an impact of your intervention in terms of reducing sexual-related gender-based violence in the schools.
Okay, so in the 10 schools that we were working in, we realized a lot of impact because when we began, there was a culture of silence amongst the learners. They would observe violence, they would go through violence and keep quiet. But after our Tuseme trainings with the girls and the boys, they began to report. And even issues like suggestion boxes in schools, they were there, but some of them were placed right by the school head's office. So as we did our trainings with the teachers, the non-teaching staff, the parents, they began to devise ways of improving reporting and even response at the schools. So we would say in the project schools, it was a pilot. We really had a reduction in terms of occurrence of SGBV because people then knew that somebody is going to report, because the learners could now identify that if a teacher pats me on my back, that is violence. And then in terms of response, again, I'll link this with the issue of reporting and how learners, if they are free about reporting to police, there's a question on that. We brought the police person in their uniform to the school. We brought the nurse in a uniform to the school. In the rural schools, it was mainly an issue of the mystery around police. So there's a victim-friendly unit here in Zimbabwe. We brought those to the school to speak to the learners, to attend the trainings, and then we demystified them and created a relationship where a learner could then walk into a police VFU station and report. And also we capitalized on the Tuseme training. This training then sets up clubs which are led by girls, and so they become a support group and they report within the club to the prefect, to the school teacher, the school head, and then the head takes it out of the school. So in terms of reporting, we also realized much change because the children are now speaking out. Then there was an issue, again, a question on scaling up, if FAWE has scaled up the intervention. So what we have done, because when we did the project in 2018 to 2020, we were funded through UNGA and UNICEF, and it was a pilot. What we are then now doing as FAWE without funding for the project, whenever we conduct our other activities that we do, other projects that we do, we now have learned to incorporate the whole school approach. So even if it is a project focusing on STEM, if it's a project focusing on sexual maturation, we incorporate the whole school approach on our own because we have realized that every stakeholder is important. The parent is key in creating safe schools. So what we are now doing is, as people who have been exposed to a whole school approach, every work that we do in the schools, we are incorporating the groups that were previously neglected.
I think there's another one, whether FAWE has successfully incorporated these minimum standards in the teacher training curriculum in Zimbabwe, and who led the training for this, and is it FAWE or Ministry of Education? And the second one is about linking learners to services in their communities, and what your experience is.
All right. So in terms of integrating the training in the teacher curriculum, we have not successfully done that. What we have done is, as we were training, FAWE would lead the trainings, but still train the Ministry of Education. So the training tool that we used, we are still wanting to have it taken up by MOPSE as something that they can use to infuse into the teacher trainings. But the training material is ready, and we are hoping that at some point we'll get to a point where it is absorbed by the ministry to be used. However, the schools that we worked with, we have shared with them copies, and we have teachers who are trained who are there, we have school heads who are there, and even at national level, we have worked with learner welfare departments whom we trained. In terms of linking, I think I spoke to this, linking service providers. We strengthen the relationship between the local police, the local healthcare workers, even the local leadership. You know, there are those community women and men who run some out-of-school clubs. We make sure that our children in the school know where to go when they face violence, apart from just reporting in the school. And we demystified the fear of going to the police. We also shared with them any local toll-free numbers for reporting abuse, because some of these schools, their major problem was lack of information and fear and just the acceptance of violence.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mrs. Ngobile. Yvonne, I don't know whether you, Stella, your hand is up. Please, Stella, take on. If you're able to also, the difference between the whole school approach and the safe school approach, but please.
Thank you. I'll leave that to Raising Voices. I just wanted to build on what Ngobile has talked about regarding the responding to the issue of confidence or safety for the children to report. I think across Africa, there's been opening of several child helplines. And the child helplines are a confidential reporting mechanism. I think so far in Africa, we have about 13 to 15 countries that have the confidential reporting mechanism. And what has made this is that it's being promoted as being central to protection, to the child protection system. So the child helpline is central to child protection system in Uganda and Kenya, Rwanda, and most of Southern African region. They're promoting a single, a uniform code, so that even if the child crosses over, say, with the porous borders, they're able to report on issues of violence. And reporting has actually gone high, especially with the confidential reporting mechanism of the child helpline, the 116. I just wanted to just highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very helpful information, Stella. And I think it is all our collective responsibility to promote the use of those helplines in every country where we are and where they are. So Yvonne, you have a question. Someone wants to highlight other forms of maintaining discipline in schools without use of absenteeism.
Samalie, do I start with the earlier question or this?
Please, just mention the question you're answering. And
okay,
then,
so you had given me a question around the safe school approach. How different is it from the whole school approach? So I think the safe school approach is basically what is the school doing to ensure that the learners are safe? Is it maybe prohibiting the use of corporal punishment? Is it establishing policies? What is it? But then the whole school approach is the process. How do we ensure that all these mechanisms and structures and systems are working to ensure the safety of the learner? So the whole school approach, if done really well, is what will ensure that there is complete safety for the learner. And that is where we're advocating for a whole school approach in all interventions. How do we discipline learners without using any form of corporal punishment? That is a very long topic. But I think the one thing we are fronting is the use of positive discipline, which is basically looking at supporting learners to develop life skills that can help them make better choices, but also that can help them learn even when they make the mistakes. Secondly, is that you're using other alternatives, like light work. You're withdrawing privileges, you're giving a verbal warning, you're asking the child to write an apology letter and things like that. And those are the different alternatives you can use. But then also the third one is that you're creating an environment where children learn the values and standards modeled for them. So when you're looking at disciplining learners, you're not only looking at they have made a mistake, I need to discipline them, but you're looking at how do we show them the right thing? How do we share our expectations of them right beforehand so that they know what is right and what is expected of them. If you really want to know more about positive discipline, I want to implore you to visit the Raising Voices website. There are lots of resources around the topic on positive discipline, and I'm sure you will be supported. Thank you so much, Samalie.
Thank you very much. And the last one was on the experience of having teachers and parents involved in the interventions beyond the teacher leaders. If you could just say that in just 30 seconds so that we can come to the end of this.
Yeah, so like I earlier said, we noticed, especially at secondary school, I think there was this assumption that the lead teachers were getting paid or they had an allowance. So even when they invited for activities and things like that, other teachers would not support, and it really became hard. So we've started bringing them in, like in the in-school trainings, and ensuring that they participate, that the trainings happen at a time that is convenient for them. And the same thing also happens for parents. We are working through the parents. The parents committee is taking lead of engaging other parents to get involved in the school activities. So those are some of the ways we are addressing this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. We are coming to the end of our conversation, and I just want to thank our speakers for the very elaborate discussions that we have been having. We've learned a lot. To me, I feel like this whole school approach presents a lot of information and knowledge that when we are going to work in the schools, we should not go with a single intervention and think that we are presenting a solution. For example, as Yvonne was explaining, the difference between a safe school and a whole school approach, that you cannot just go and say, I'm just working on the safety of the children, so I have this policy or conduct and that's it, and think that it's enough. We have to look at all the ecosystem and the people, structures and the systems comprehensively. And it speaks to maybe even working in one school as different actors, but layering and having different interventions that are looking at different pieces of work. Raising voices, thank you very much that you're looking at the whole school culture and ensuring that people's mindsets and attitudes are changed and relationships are built. This is very powerful. FAWE Zimbabwe, we really appreciate the standards that you set forth and how you were intentional implementing each standard from step 1 up to step 8. Very, very powerful, and looking at the environment, parents, and the different, trainings that you offered, not only to the teachers in the schools, but also to the officials in the Ministry of Education, because you understand that they are also leaders that play a very big role in the schools. I don't want to preempt what has been discussed. Dr. Manuela, we appreciate the data. It gave us some stress, discomfort, but it was a very strong foundation for us to see what are we doing and why is the whole school approach necessary. Stella, always appreciated for your spot-on input, the opportunities that you gave us to think through about the school and why it's important that we work in the schools. At this point, I want to bring this webinar to a close end by inviting Devin to wrap up and close this webinar. I thank everyone for the active participation in terms of listening, giving us questions, and really appreciate and hope we shall be able to share the materials that you've asked for. But yeah, David could also speak to this.
Thank you so much, Samalie. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of our speakers, all of our panelists for your insights and contributions. This was such a fascinating discussion. I think we hear a lot about whole school approaches and the data that informs the development of these approaches, but we rarely have these spaces to talk about it. We rarely have the information on how different practitioners and activists are making use of this approach and how researchers are learning from it and what remains to be better understood. So the Coalition for Good Schools really started with this vision in mind, not just for strengthening Global South-led focus and agenda on the issue of violence against children in schools, but for creating platforms like these where those working on this issue and learning about this issue every single day can come together and share their learnings and their challenges and their solutions. So the Coalition's just carved out a new 3-year strategy that really seeks to deepen this work. We do hope that these future spaces include not just English language conversations, but that we bring our Francophone and Lusophone and Arabic speaking regions into the conversation as well. So please stay tuned. If you want to get involved, if you have an innovative solution that you want to share with the rest of the field, the rest of this movement, please do visit our website, reach out to us at info@coalitionforgoodschools.org or Africa Hub at coalitionforgoodschools.org if you find yourself in the region. And on behalf of the Coalition, on behalf of the Africa Hub, and on behalf of those of us here at Raising Voices, we thank you so, so much for taking the time today. And thank you to Samalie, a special thank you for holding this space.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. And to our leaders on this webinar, we thank you very much for bringing us all together here and also managing everything that we've been doing on this, including the technology and managing the agenda and all that. And thank you very much for doing the research and knowing that we should be the right persons to speak about this first webinar in Africa. We thank you very much. And I thank everyone once again, and to our dear participants, I wish you a good week further. To everyone, bye-bye.